show you what has been marked as exhibit number 7. And I'm going to start again with going down to show you where the stream is here. And it says, on February 17, that's the same email we've seen a couple times now, where she's attaching the confidentiality agreement, telling you she'll have a draft post-NEP agreement, but she's getting the signed confidentiality agreement first. And then I'm going to direct your attention to the very top part, and that is Wednesday, February 18. And it's from you to Dana Lowry, and it says, Amber is sending the signed confidentiality agreement to me. I assume I will receive all the underlying financials and a list of anticipated future revenue streams and documentation pertaining thereto. What did you mean by underlying financials and a list of anticipated future revenue streams and documentation pertaining thereto?
I mean, this is typical for an actor. They have profit participations, back ends. I wanted to have a list of what his future revenue would be. He might have had movies booked that he would render services after marriage. I just wanted to see the pro forma.
What did you mean by back ends?
Back end is either profit participations or royalties. Sometimes it's box office bonuses. You just have to look at the underlying agreement on each movie, TV show, etc., to track what the revenue will be from each project.
And why is that relevant?
I want to know what they're going to make during the marriage. I want to know the income during the marriage.
And those are all components of what they make during the marriage?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then you said, I can't really comment on the document until I get this information. What document were you referring to there?
The post-NEP agreement that I anticipated she would send.
How much time expired between when you were sent the confidentiality agreement for Amber Heard to sign and when you indicated back to counsel for Mr. Depp that Amber is sending the signed confidentiality agreement to you?
The next day.
What, if any, communication did you receive from Mr. Depp in connection with the post-NEP agreement?
I received one telephone call.
And whom did you receive that telephone call from?
Mr. Depp.
Please describe the telephone call from Mr. Depp.
My recollection is that he was very mean, that he called me names, and that he fired me on behalf of them.
When you say that he was very mean, what did you mean?
Well, my only exact recollection is he called me a bitch.
Mr. Depp called you a bitch on that telephone call?
Hearsay,
Yeah.
leading.
What, if any, observations did you make during the telephone call from Mr. Depp, during which time he called you a bitch?
I thought he was under the influence.
Why did you think that?
He was slurring his words, and his speech pattern was similar to my children's speech pattern when they were under him. I was just extremely rattled by the call. I mean, I was on the phone for a very short time with him because he was represented by counsel, and I didn't want to be rude and hang up, but I told him I had to hang up. Like after 2 or 3 minutes after I realized what was happening, it took me very off guard, and that's all I remember is that it really shook me up.
After that phone call, did you perform any further services for Ms. Heard in connection with the postnuptial agreement?
No.
Do you recall ever seeing a postnuptial draft agreement?
No.
Has either Ms. Heard or Mr. Depp contacted you at any time after the call with Mr. Depp respecting pursuing a postnuptial agreement?
No.
Who, if anyone, was paying your legal services?
I don't recall.
Was it your understanding that Mr. Depp had the authority to fire you?
No.
Did you tell him that?
I don't recall.
And isn't it true that he wouldn't have had the authority to fire you even if he were paying for your legal services? True?
True.
What, if any, communications did you have with Dana Lowy about your conversation with Mr. Depp after the conversation with Mr. Depp?
I don't recall specifically.
What do you recall generally, if anything?
I do recall that I told her that I was no longer representing him. But I don't know if I did that in writing. Somehow she knew.
But and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you testified that Mr. Depp did not have the authority to fire you, correct?
Correct.
Ms. Mulrooney, when did your attorney-client relationship with Ms. Heard relating to a potential postnuptial agreement terminate?
Shortly after that phone call.
When you say shortly after that phone call, can you give us a time frame of how long it was after the phone call?
Within a few days. Could be one.
He didn't have the power to fire you, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any recollection of ever receiving any more communications from Dana Lowry furthering the postnuptial agreement after Johnny Depp called you and told you he was firing you on behalf of Amber and called you names?
No substantive. I recall that there was no more substantive conversations.
Is there any question in your mind that it was Mr. Depp who called you?
No.
All right.